Okay, checking. Good. People can hear. Very loud for John and others. Okay, near it. So, welcome everyone to another Saturday. Not in the science classroom like we were last week. So, it's good to be back in the space of the Triple Gym. A few announcements. Next week, Ajahn will be here. So, he will be with us for about 1 month from next Friday until about January 13th or so. So that's really wonderful, and I hope people can make it. If you haven't met Ajahn Kovilo, or if you have, he's a wonderful monk, and just I would encourage everyone to take advantage of his time here. He is a really wonderful Pali scholar, a beautiful practitioner, and just a swell guy. So please, yeah, it's really special we get to have him. And he will be the other monk involved in this project long term in terms of come spring, he'll hopefully be with us indefinitely. And uh, yeah, so that's good. A few things. If you haven't seen on our website or the newsletter, we are having a New Year's Eve all night meditation vigil like we did last year in Fauntleroy Church in West Seattle. So feel free to look at our calendar page if you haven't yet. And yeah, if you're up for staying up for all or part of the night, we'll have coffee, we'll have a nap room, and you don't have to stay the whole time. But it's actually really fun. And we not only meditate, but we do a traditional series of 108 ETP-SO chants. It's pretty wonderful. And if you get miserable, you'll be miserable with a bunch of other people who are also tired, but it actually tends to be really fun. Gary, do we have announcements about St. Mark's?
I think there it is. Yes, excuse me. As many of us already know, St. Mark's donates the use of this space every week. And one way that we can show our appreciation for those who are inclined to, there is a donation box back by the books. And so we encourage people to feel free to use that.
Okay, so one final announcement is if you are interested in hosting monastics or lay people who come and visit us, feel free to, there's a sign-up sheet. If you haven't emailed me already, there's a sign-up sheet back on the book table, and feel free to put your name down. It's just a beautiful chance for our community to kind of cultivate this quality of hospitality. And a lot of great people and monks and nuns pass through the area. So opening up a room in your house can be a wonderful way to cultivate generosity and giving, and to get some time with great practitioners or monastics. So just back there, there's a sign-up sheet for that, or for drivers. We'll begin by chanting the 5 subjects for frequent recollection, page 55 in the chanting book. If you're joining us on Zoom or YouTube, you can find the link to that Amravati chanting book in the notes or the chat. And once again, that's page 55. Handamayam abinha pacho ekana patang banamase. Jara Dhammo mi jaranganatito. I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. Bayadi Dhammo mi bayading anatito. I am of the nature to sicken. I have not gone beyond sickness. Marana Dhammo mi marana ganatito. I am of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond dying. Sabehi me pihehi mana pehi nana bawo vina bawo. All that is mine, beloved and pleasing, will become otherwise, will become separated from me. Kamma sakomi kamma dayado kamma yoni kamma bandhu kamma patisarano yang kammang karisami kalayanang wa papakang wa tasadayado bhavisami. I am the owner of my karma, heir to my karma, born of my karma, related to my karma, abide supported by my karma. Whatever karma I shall do, for good or for ill, of that I will be the heir. Ewang amehi bin hung pachawe kitabang. Thus we should frequently recollect. Good uplifting Theravada chant. It grounds the heart in truth. The first four are the difficulty of the situation, and the fifth is the escape route. It's the fact that we have the ability to purify the mind and create new conditions. So we'll meditate together for about 20 or 25 minutes. So begin as usual by establishing an upright posture, balancing the spine on the fulcrum of the pelvis, a bit like you would balance the handle of a broom or a mop on your palm. You can rock slightly back and forth and side to side until you find the natural center. Move awareness slowly up the vertebrae, one by one, stacking them like stones. Until you reach the top of the head. Notice any tension in the eyes, the jaw, and soften. Soften any tension in the tongue, the belly, and allow breathing to slow and deepen. Smiling on the inside of your mouth. And before doing anything, allow awareness to expand wide as the room. And just let yourself settle. See what's coming to the meditation with you. How are you? And let it all be present for the moment. It's all welcome. Just sit with what is here. Allowing the breath to become a centering landmark in that room. And you can approach meditation using your usual object or technique. But if you want, you can also cultivate recollection of the triple gem to brighten the heart. Buddhanusati, Dhammanusati, Sanghanusati. Recollection of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And how you can do this is bring to mind either your image of the Buddha, this teacher who has given us so much, who left a life of wealth to search for awakening. You can recollect the suttas you've read, something that really made you have faith in the depth of these teachings, or in teachers you've met who've inspired this glow in the heart, a spiritual love. But I find one of the most powerful things to recollect is just your first moment of real faith. That first moment when you understood the depth of the practice of what's been given to us and felt like you were stepping into a footstep that had been waiting for you. That glow in the heart of finding home. And just bring to mind that moment and that glow. And let that warm the mind and brighten the heart for the meditation. Gratitude, faith, and we'll sit together in silence for a time. can gently bring your awareness back to your heart. Allowing its glow to warm again. Either through your recollection of that first moment of hope, faith, or a simple recollection of loving kindness, metta. And you can imagine drawing back the curtains to the front, behind, and either side of that heart, and just letting its light shine out to all beings in this room, to all beings. Gentle care and warmth. May they be well. May they be free from fear. May they be filled with loving kindness. May they find home. May I find home. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So I think there usually comes a point in people's lives where they intuit home. And I think often we call that the midlife crisis. although I think it can come a good deal earlier or a good deal later. And sometimes it's not Christ so much as simply a encounter with a path and teachings and a way which promises something we've felt missing in our lives up until then. The Buddha said that suffering can result in either bewilderment or a search. And there's an alternate version of the cycle of dependent origination where instead of the links in the chain of suffering leading back into more ignorance, more bewilderment, more becoming, they lead to faith, confidence, to joy, to samadhi, and to liberation. And whenever I hear about these moments, the pivot point of a life where someone somehow suddenly understands that there's a way out, there's a different way of living, these are the most meaningful stories I know of. Suddenly a path opens and you find that there's a footprint that feels it was made for you and you stepped into it, or a longing you've held your whole life somewhere in your heart has a voice and a form. And for me, it was when I was 15 and I read Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha, like many a burgeoning hippie. And it's actually a pretty non-Buddhist book in many ways, but it was my first image of the Buddha. And the idea that one could live a life completely focused and oriented towards cleansing the heart felt so intuitively right to me. And as if it had articulated something I'd known and searched for my whole life. And there was an intuition of gold light. And I started meditating. I know another monk who was looking up Buddhism on Wikipedia when he was about 16 years old and was reading the article and read the sentence, "Craving is the source of suffering." And he said, that's true. And then he looked up the next paragraph and it had the image of a monk meditating on a hill. And he went down to his mom and said, "Mom, I am going to be a monk." And he's a monk. I know another practitioner who did something similar, but he didn't actually become a monk. He got a golden bowl somewhere and told his mom she needed to bring him food in his room. And I don't think she did, but the intention was good. Longpo Sumedho was in the Navy and he read What the Buddha Taught by Bhante Rahula. And in his characteristic voice, he said, "And then I realized I'm a Buddhist." And he went to Thailand and ordained. Something in us knows that there's more to this realm than just what we see, that there's a greater purpose to life than a well-adjusted middle-class existence. And that moment where you first begin to intuit what that could be, that there's actually a path, is precious. It's one of the most meaningful moments in our whole trajectory of life. And I think there's something very profound hidden in the fact that we all somehow know we've lost our way. Longpo Cha calls the heart our true home. And we all understand somehow that we've lost our home, that we're not home. And when the heart moves out into the world looking for that, feeding off of it, the Buddha gave the analogy of fire, feeding off of logs, bound, agitated, burning, confined. It knows it's not deep down, it knows it can't be satiated. It knows it's tying itself to something that is shifting and disintegrating in front of it, that it's reaching into a liquid looking for a solid. And when that heart stops trying to feed off of the world and begins cultivating a different route, a different path. The Buddha characterized the path to Nibbana as an overgrown path to an ancient city, lost and now revealed. The switch is to the image of light, and light that lands on nothing. And the Buddha was so careful not to speak exactly about what Nibbana was. There's two routes to articulating truth. There's apophatic method, which is articulating truth by what it is not. And there's cataphatic method, which is articulating truth by naming it, by what it is. And cataphatic method, naming truth by what it is, has a danger of reifying it, of making us cling to an idea in words. And reality is always beyond words. And the Buddha recognized this and saw the real danger as practitioners when you encounter a new state of concentration or joy or unification of heart. Often it's the most precious thing you've ever touched. And the drive or draw to define that as enlightenment or as God is almost irresistible, to take that as the ultimate, because it's the best thing we've ever encountered. And the Buddha saw that happen time and again. His teachers all became hung up on refined states of concentration, thinking that they had attained enlightenment. I remember when I was about to ordain, I talked to a friend about this deep-rooted search of mine, and he said, enlightenment, yeah, I took ecstasy once. I think I've touched that before. I think I was quiet. But the intuition deep down to follow that, the Buddha recognized the danger. And so he was, I think, one of the most strict apophatic teachers in history. Instead of articulating in detail what nirvana, what enlightenment was, he names it, but mainly he names it by what it is not. He says it's the cessation of greed, hatred, and delusion. It's the cessation of ignorance. It's the fire going out. But then as to what that is, he's not going to give us a detailed answer because we will cling to it. And what he says is, look, practice for the sake of letting go. And when you touch what's beyond all your clinging, you'll know it for yourself. There's no need to say much more about it. But the issue is coming from a North European culture, or at least much of our culture is influenced by that. When we think about a fire going out, which was the analogy of nibbana, cooling, it literally means, we have an intuition of darkness and death. But that analogy was given in the Ganges River Valley, where things are really hot. A fire going out was not bad. And the Buddhists and the Hindus at the time had the conception that when fire disappeared, it turned back into this all-pervading energy. They called it agi. And when the Buddha was pressed to give an analogy of the enlightened mind, he said it is light that lands on nothing. So when we let go, we aren't left with nothing, but there can be that intuition at first when we encounter the path and hear about these translations of nirvana as extinction, of emptiness. But it's just empty of self and filled with reality, filled with something beyond what we can speak, but that somehow we intuit deep down. And the Buddha said it was beyond anything we'd conceived of. The characteristics of experience, anicca, anatta, dukkha, not self, or impermanence, not self, and suffering. The deathless isn't the opposite of anicca. The opposite of anicca, impermanent, is nicca, permanent. But the deathless, the Buddha said, was beyond time. It was amata, the deathless. Similarly, death is not the opposite of birth. Death is the result of birth. And the deathless, nibbana, is something apart from all of that. So that's awful abstract. But it's useful to know that we can touch moments of this cessation. Ajahn Buddhadasa said, if we didn't experience little moments of cooling, of nibbana every day, we would be insane. And it's true, we pass over them so easily because dukkha is how we orient ourselves. The last thing you can take from people is their dukkha. So we skip over it. But notice when the suffering subsides, when the anger cools, there's a moment of silence. And this is an intuition of what it means to be cool. And the Buddha laid out these 4 stages of awakened being. And I really think it's important to bring back these figures, this progression into our view, because we're not meditating to lower our blood pressure. We're not meditating to be slightly happier. It helps with those things, but we're meditating and we practice for the complete liberation of the heart. And you begin to meet people as you enter these realms of practitioners, of monastics, who are different than anyone you've ever met. They are pure. They have an unshakability to them that you've never touched, you've never intuited, you've never seen. And I remember searching throughout my lay life for someone who seemed a little different. And then finally, I met some monastics who did, and it should shake you. I remember seeing the video of Ajahn Chah giving an interview at Chithurst. And like Ajahn, there's a monk named, I think, Warapanya, who's disrobed now, not Joseph. I forgot his name, Paul Breiter. And he said, Ajahn Chah looked like a frog on his lily pad, happy. And I thought I would do anything to be like that. And it's true, you could just see it in the video. There is something different. And when you realize that we are capable of that, how can you aim for anything else? You don't have to believe in rebirth. You don't have to believe Nibbana is mapped onto an ontology, a view of the world apart from just what you see if you don't want to. But maybe you can entertain the idea that it is possible for a human being to be utterly selfless. It is possible. And how can we aim for anything other than that once we know? I remember hearing about a woman entering a commune, a Christian commune, and she said, I asked myself what I would have to give up to pursue this life. And I realized the answer came back that I'd have to give up everything. And I realized it was worth it. And we don't have to give up everything on the surface. We can keep living our lives, but the beauty of this path is that it overlays and transmutes a seemingly mundane life into something transcendent and noble. Monks' lives are pretty routine, and yet the routine is where the transcendent is found. External conditions are simply tools. So the Buddha laid out this progression of how the mind awakens. He said, first, there's the attainment of stream entry, the first encounter with Nibbana. It's your first vision. And the heart isn't ready yet to completely jump. So this is usually portrayed as a flash of lightning. The Buddha says there's 3 kinds of mind. There's the mind like I think he says, a raw pustule, where one is angry and immediately spits out angry words when abused. So this is like a raw pustule where you poke it and it spits out pus. The second kind of mind is mind like a lightning strike, and that's the mind of a sotapanna, a stream enterer, where they've seen truth for one instant and then darkness comes again. And then there's the mind like a diamond, which is the mind of an arahant, a completely awakened being, flawless, clear, able to cut through anything. I love that list. And this stream enterer mind, they say that the three fetters, there's 10 fetters to be let go of. The Buddha loves lists, and they are so helpful. But this one is 10 fetters that you release towards complete liberation, these bonds. And the first three you release are Sakaya Ditti, self-view, which is assuming that you are the khandhas, the focus points of identity, the body, perception, feeling, mental formations, consciousness, basically your focal points of identity. A stream enterer no longer identifies with those. The second is skeptical doubt in the teaching and the path. A stream enterer knows that there's a path to liberation and has an intuition for what that is because they've seen the deathless. How can they doubt? And the third is silapata paramasa, which is attachment to rites and rituals. And often this is expanded to include attachment to your kind of cultural conditioning, our ways of operating in the world. And a stream enterer has seen beyond those. And those three fetters drop. And the Buddha says that a stream enterer only has 7 lifetimes left to live after that attainment. So the next level, the Buddha says, is the once returner, which means that sensual desire and ill will are further weakened. The third stage is the non-returner, which sensual desire and ill will are completely let go of. Those are the next 2 fetters. And they will purportedly never be reborn as a human again. And then there's the final 5 fetters that drop into complete awakening, arahantship, conceit, ignorance, desire for rebirth in the fine material and immaterial realms, and restlessness. So you hear those, and it seems like this sort of esoteric leveling system. If anyone's played, it seems very strange and arbitrary. So it's really useful to see what's happening. Is the first 3 fetters that drop, attachment to this body, the khandhas, identifying with them, skeptical doubt, and attachment to rites and rituals. This is the level of our cultural conditioning. This is the conditions that we take on since birth, identifying with our name, our nationality, our gender, our personality. Those are the khandhas that you let go, you no longer identify with. We're no longer trapped by our vision of how our culture must operate because we've seen beyond it, or that's what a stream enterer would intuit. And because they've touched the deathless for a moment, there's no doubt that there's a path. And that's embedded in the heart forever, is something has seen truth and that can't be undone. And that's the letting go of skeptical doubt of the teaching. And as to why that leads to only a certain number of rebirths is, if you believe in rebirth, there's this idea that at death, there's a life review where you kind of flash back through your life. And I've heard some say that a stream enterer on that life review sees the deathless. They see that moment of flashing lightning. They see that vision. And it's so powerful, it automatically propels their mind upwards. They can't fall, not deeply. And a stream enterer will dedicate their whole life to this path. It's their intuition of what they're capable of is unchangeable. And the Buddha was so clear that this is a achievable goal. I know lay people who have attained stream entry. This does happen. It is possible. You can hear people speak about the shift in the heart that is completely irreversible, that changes their entire trajectory. And it's useful not to get caught in these systems. If often people will think, am I a stream enterer? Am I not? If you're asking, you're probably not. But it's useful to know it's possible. It's possible to touch something which is irreversible in the heart. The next level the Buddha speaks about is the once returner, which is the person who it further practice attenuates sensual desire and ill will. And this, it says that they'll only be reborn in the human realm once more. And this ushers into the third level, an anagami, or the non-returner, who is never reborn in the human realm. And the fetters they let go of are ill will and sensual desire. And once again, this isn't an arbitrary leveling system. That's the biological level of conditioning. Every animal, every biological system has ill will and sensual desire. All beings flee from pain, and all beings are attracted to kind of nourishment and pleasure. That's the basic biological mandate. So a non-returner lets go of an even deeper strata of conditioning of the body. The stream enter lets go of the conditioning of social conditioning. The anagami lets go of biological conditioning. And the Buddha says that that being will be reborn in the pure abodes, which are said to be these realms of practice that are immaterial. You don't have to believe in these things, but the Buddha spoke about them. And the fourth level, and there were many lay people that the Buddha spoke about who are anagamis as well. Chitta, the householder, this is attainable. And the fourth level, the complete awakening, is the arahant. And the fetters that are let go of here are rebirth in the fine material realm, the immaterial realm, conceit, restlessness, and ignorance. And this is letting go of the deepest roots of ignorance at the level of the mind. The stream enter lets go of social conditioning. The anagami lets go of biological, and the arahant lets go of the deepest patterning in the mind. And that is awakening. And the Buddha said that an arahant is never reborn. But it's not nothing either. Many people approached the Buddha and asked, what happens to the Tathagata, to you after death? And the Buddha said, basically, that question doesn't apply. They said, does the Tathagata exist, not exist, both exist and exist, neither exist nor not exist? And the Buddha said, it does not apply. It's beyond words. There's a beautiful illustration of the difference between that first fetter of identity view and conceit. There's a monk named Kemika who's sick and dying. And some elder monks send a messenger over to Venerable Kemika and say, we hear you're dying. How are you feeling? And he says, I'm not feeling too well. I'm dying. And they say, have you attained awakening? And he says, no. And they say, do you identify with any of the aggregates? And he says, no. And they say, how can you not be awakened if you don't identify with any of the aggregates, with the body, perception, feeling, mental formations, consciousness? And he says, look, it's like the scent of a flower. If you look at a flower, can you say the scent comes from the petals, from the stamen, from the stem? You can't say it comes from any of those, and yet the scent remains. Similarly, I don't identify with the body. I don't identify with feeling, perception, mental formations, or consciousness. But this vague scent of the self remains. And then at that moment, Venerable Kemika became the one monk in the suttas to become awakened from his own Dharma talk. So may we all be so lucky. But it's such a beautiful illustration. Even someone who no longer believes they are this body, this mind, there's still some residual sense of me and mine, asmimana in Pali, the scent of a flower. And that's just steadily dispelled. And an arahant is selfless. It's not nothing. There can be this intuition in the West that if you let go of all these cravings, what's left? Do you just become this dry automaton? And I feel I know arahants, and that's not what they're like. There's nothing left but the inclination to do good, to give completely. There's an emptiness about them. Every action echoes, it seems, forever through them. The Buddha said the karma you create by giving to an arahant is immense. And it's possible. And it's important to look at what the Buddha laid out as the basic approach to finding our way to home. And that's home. He said that everyone who isn't an arahant is basically mentally deranged, all of us. The arahants are the only sane people. And the Buddha said that the route to stream entry, the four conditions, two of them are external, sadhamma savanang and saparisa sangseva, association with good people and hearing the true Dhamma. And two of them are internal, yoniso manasikara and Dhamma patipada, dhammanu Dhamma patipada, practicing Dhamma in line with Dhamma. So practicing correctly, appropriate attention and practicing correctly. And these are something we can do. We come and we spend time with practitioners, Kalyanamitta. We enter monasteries when we have the chance. We listen to Dhamma when we can. We steer our attention constantly in line with the Four Noble Truths. And we practice, we meditate daily. And the karma is so potent. People so often lament and really become distressed when their concentration isn't as good as they would like it to be, when their meditation isn't coming together in these profound, bright states of jhana. And they forget to look at what's happening to their life in every other realm. This is a whole path. There's giving, there's right view, there's morality, and just a life looked at through the lens of the Four Noble Truths, oriented towards a path to awakening. It's so powerful. It changes people over time. And it will change us. And people discount this. They forget. And when the cycles of suffering return, because suffering and our old patterns don't just disappear in one go, they come back. And that's a gift because it lets us skim off the surface each time. If we had to let go all at once, it would be too much for many of us. So the Dhamma and samsara are kind. At least it can be looked at this way. They bring these old cycles of suffering back to us again and again. But if you look carefully, you'll notice it lightens. It does over the years. But it's not always as fast as we would like. I talk about that one monk who went to my teacher and said, "When will it be better?" And my teacher, Ajahn said, "In 5 years, it'll be a little bit better." So, and yet it also happens so quickly. But we're working against lifetimes of patterning. But to have faith that you are exactly where you need to be, this is exactly the conditions you can practice with. And you'll notice that as you let go of more and more things, as you become more and more oriented towards the path, your suffering, it continues to come. It focuses on the things you care about now because our grasping continues. So of course it will be challenged. But if you're able to turn towards these points of suffering, to comprehend the suffering, first noble truth, and to let go, the second, to realize peace, that is the route to liberation. And so every suffering is a gift if you approach it correctly, because it's an opportunity to practice the Four Noble Truths and to let go of the deepest strata of our clinging. And the Four Noble Truths, faith, confidence are self-fulfilling prophecy. If you really bow to the Four Noble Truths, if you really look at your life as a gift given to you for exactly this, and realize that a life that didn't have dukkha, there'd be no friction, no impetus to separate out the knowing element from the conditions, to pull out those threads of awareness from the cloth of the world. This is what drives us to not be careless, is our dukkha. And in that sense, it can be looked at truly as a gift and exactly where you need to be. So we're all on the route home. We just haven't realized it. And your life doesn't have to change all of a sudden. You don't have to go off and ordain, although you can if you want. But stop and look now and realize that because intention, because this lens of the Four Noble Truths are the quintessential element, the world is ripe for the path home. And how far you can take that does not have a limit. So I wish everyone the best journey home today. So we have a time for questions and discussion. If people want to raise their hand, we can bring a mic over to you and just say your name and what you'd like to talk about. If you're on Zoom, feel free to raise your electronic hand or type your question into the chat.
Beautiful talk, thank you. I'm curious if there were any insights or anything worth sharing. I'm sure there were, but from your time at the prison yesterday.
So we got invited to teach at a prison to inmates yesterday, and drove there and then found out that they'd forgotten to register us and couldn't get in. So the good lesson was, any good thing you try to do, Mara will usually put up a block once or twice. That was the second attempt. The first time it had like gotten cleaned. So my hope is number 3 is the lucky number. But if people haven't seen the documentary, does anyone know the one about Goenka practitioners in prison, what the name of that documentary is? The Dharma Brothers, yes. So it's about Goenka practitioners in prison, and prisoners live pretty similar lives to monks. And I just think it's this beautiful, I remember seeing a picture of the inmates meditating, and the nobility that's brought to a human being through that is so amazing. And I just think it speaks to the power of shifting view. And there's a book called The Last Breath about Longpo Pasano counseling inmate on death row in San Quentin named Jay Siriporn through his final days, and just to see what can happen to a heart behind bars if you realize the internal freedom available is profound. So no exact insight yet, but hopefully we'll get to go back soon. Who's the mic? Okay.
So I have a more, I guess, a personal question. So what was your experience with stream entry?
I'm not a stream enterer, to be very clear. Yeah, I know of people who are, I think. It's useful to know in the Sangha, the monastics aren't supposed to speak about the names of those who are enlightened or about their psychic powers, because it's to avoid creating a cult of personality. And it's a beautiful rule. And the Buddha was clear. His stepmother, Mahapajapati, tried to offer him a robe, and he said, offer it to the Sangha. The Sangha is more merit even than the Tathagata. And there's this beautiful idea that even an enlightened being, the institution of the Sangha and 4 or more monastics together, that's the most powerful field of karma possible. And I think the two things resonate with each other in that we're supposed to avoid talking about our own awakening experiences or not, or other monks, which is why I didn't name the monks I think who are enlightened, but I think they exist, except for Ajahn Chai. I think we all kind of feel that about him, at least I do. But it avoids that cult of personality and lets people just appreciate the teaching as it is. So yes. But I do feel I know lay people who have attained stream entry. I think multiple ones, and it is possible. Mary, please.
Hello, Ajahn. Hello, everybody. I have 2 questions, if I can take the time. One is this empty of self state. And it seems to me, and I'm checking this out with you, if one is empty of self, then one's whole self, the definition that one gives to everything from one's understanding, from this, how to say this, that then the self-definition of phenomena has to stop too. Then phenomena is not self-ascribed. Does that make sense? You get that?
Give me a little more.
Okay, so I perceive a tree. I perceive a tree and I have all my associations with it. They come from my sense of self. This is a tree, this is what it does. And if there's no sense of self, then that sense of phenomena also changes. Is that so?
Yes.
Yes, I thought so. Thank you. Thank you for that. Careful answer.
Go for your second question, Mary, but I'll circle back around to say a little more about that as well.
Okay. And the second one, it's beyond me. It's about, you said an arhat lets go of the mind. And I don't think I'm developed enough to even understand that. But does that mean that the chitta is not there? If they let go of mind, heart mind, is the chitta gone?
Gosh, I should have expected questions like this when I gave this talk. These are great questions, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you.
First, great questions. And I didn't necessarily mean to say that the arhat lets go of the mind so much as the patterning in the mind.
Okay, I can get that. I get
And
that.
I think what they let go of is it's the fetters. And one of the fetters with that I consider so important to see is the fetter of conceit and restlessness.
Yeah.
It's sort of because we sort of feel ourselves by that constant hovering and movement. And when that's let go of, something happens. And there's a book called Meiji Geo, who is people believe an enlightened Meiji, an enlightened nun from about, I think she died about 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a description in her book of her final stage of awakening described by Ajahn Mahabua, or maybe it was Ajahn Mahabua, her teacher, describing his final awakening. And he talks about coming to this glowing center of the mind. And then he realizes that itself is ignorance and lets go of that. And suddenly there's the deathless. So what happens at those upper echelons of practice, I think, is almost, it's beautiful to get these glimpses, but as to exactly what it is, that's something I think we have to experience for ourselves. The chitta, which is the word for the mind and heart, the mind-heart, it is a beautiful quote and relevant that people don't become enlightened, chittas become enlightened. And Longpa Suchitto gives the best description of chitta I've ever heard. And there does seem to be an element where that yeah, I can't speak more to it, but yes, there's something about the chitta and enlightenment happening there, and I don't know what exactly that is.
It's okay.
But
We'll
it's
wait to find out.
exactly. And no, and the Buddha was his restraint as a teacher was so amazing because people pressed him on these issues in his own time. They said, "What happens after death? Or sorry, what is enlightenment exactly? What happens to you after you the Tathagata after you die? Do you exist?" And some of them, there's one monk who even threatened to disrobe if he didn't tell him. And the Buddha said, "Did I ever say, come ordain with me, and I will teach you the beginning of the world, and I will teach you what happens to Tathagata after death? Did I ever say that?" And the monk says, "No, no, you didn't." And the Buddha said, "I said, I will teach you suffering and the end of suffering." And the monk said, "Yes, yes, you did," and practiced. And the Buddha's restraint in his pragmatism, because we get so wound up in these questions of what exact sort of self are we letting go of and what exactly does that look like. I think the Buddha's restraint around steering us back towards the act of letting go is so admirable and precious. And it's I'll just say that I can't answer your question there.
That's okay. It's a good pondering.
Yeah, yes.
It's a good pondering. It just seems back to the first one, when you're empty of self, you're empty of desire, and therefore the perception of what you see is free of desire. And yeah, and then
Absolutely.
everything would look almost the same.
Absolutely. And well, the thing is, the Buddha said that when one becomes enlightened, they called it nibbana with remainder, which meant that
Mm.
the khandhas that exist, the body remains for another a few years, and all these aggregates still function, perception, etc. But you're right, they'll never be motivated by craving, by the defilements.
Okay.
And there's also not this renewed becoming. So when those khandhas disappear, yes, all phenomena dissolve.
Mhm.
And there's a state of concentration the Buddha says is only accessible to non-returners and arhants called the perception of feeling and perception. And that seems to speak to exactly what you're talking about with maybe things can dissolve in that
Mhm.
moment.
Mhm.
But the Buddha was very, that's a state that is inarticulatable because it's only accessible to people who have touched enlightenment.
Yeah. I want to thank you for your answers, and I want to thank you for that really beautiful talk. It was really quite touching and encouraging. So thank you very much, Ajahn.
Thank you, Mary. Let me know if you find the answers to those questions.
I'll be right on it with you.
Another Zoom question, please. Top left.
Hello, Ajahn Nisabho. I'm so happy to finally get to speak to you. I've been watching your Dharma talks like for the past few months, and I just really appreciate you. I live in New York City, so I'm not nearby to go visit, but I would like to.
Where do you
And
live? Where do you live again?
New York City.
New York City. Okay. That is a drive.
Yeah,
Okay. It's great to meet
yeah.
you. And please, if you're ever in Seattle, we have people who can host you. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Go for it.
Great.
What's your question?
So, I was wondering, like, I'm going through a lot of dukkha right now in my practice, but also like feels empowering because I'm able to hold my dukkha, like it's like past, like dukkha from the past, and it's like sort of bringing up a desire to like I don't like it's hard to tell if it's from like a wounded place or I'm like I feel like I've been betrayed by like family, society in such a deep way that like I'm like, oh yeah, then like I should like, it makes sense to me logically that I should be a monastic, right? Because it's like I can give my all in that sense because Buddhism is what is healing my dukkha in a very significant way. And so it's like that sort of um, trust in relationship is like really strong. In comparison, it's almost like a huge contrast. But my main question is like, um, that desire to be a monastic seems to be coming from a wounded place. And I don't know how like solid that is.
What's your name one more time?
Guadalupe.
Guadalupe, great to meet you.
Me too.
Great question. I think there's a lot of people in the audience who have that in them too. I think it's really common and wholesome when you encounter the path and begin to intuit its power. It's the best thing. I mean, these teachings are amazing, and I think it makes complete sense to feel that contrast with everything you've touched before. And sometimes the discrepancy becomes so clear that leaping up of the heart towards another path is, how could it not have that intuition to some extent? I think that desire to move into a complete renunciation of the world or towards the monastic form is archetypal. So it's something that lives in most of us. I think most practitioners have somewhere in their heart, like, maybe if my spouse died, maybe if my kids grew up, maybe someday. And I think it's important to have that part of our hearts, and it has form. And I think when it comes up, especially at the beginning of practice, it's really good to speak to it and let it gather light. It's sort of a gem, and let it gather sunlight, hold it out, and follow its intuition in the sense of, it's really seductive to try to make these big decisions, but just go to a monastery for a few days. In the East Coast, there's Empty Cloud, there's Temple. You may have already tapped into those. There's Bhavana Society. And that's just good to do as a practitioner, is spend a few days there, spend a few weeks. And these decisions are far too big for the head to make. You need to just go there in person. And what often happens is you honor that intention by going there, by dedicating more of your life to the practice. And then you realize actually what you've found is good enough. And you sort of come to a centered place where you don't actually have to change that much. But I'd say, especially initially, any large leap into something completely out of the blue, usually it's best just to take little steps. And often what happens is, you begin exploring, go visit monasteries, and that gem that's gathered sunlight, it becomes one lighthouse among many in your life. And you're guiding yourself by a lot of stars, but you find that actually very little had to change on the surface of your life, maybe, or maybe the big externals didn't. You still got to keep the job. You're just meditating more. So I'd say, like, honor that intuition as an archetypal indicator of something deep in you. Let it take you to the monastery, but understand that if it doesn't lead you to actually ordaining, it's not less, and your life won't be less for that necessarily. Your karma might not be right for that at this moment. Maybe you have other obligations. At the same time, if you do go to monasteries and you really love it, if you're have the inclination to ordain and have the ability, the world needs monastics, especially women monastics. And yeah, go for it. But I'm biased. But there's always a balance of, like, yes, that's beautiful, explore it, go to monasteries. And people can live amazing lives of practice where they are. And the trick is not to fracture your heart between the two and forget the beauty of the situation you find yourself in. So Dharma is duty, and follow what you feel your heart and external circumstances give you as a duty. Does that help at all, Guadalupe?
Yes, just talking to you helps. So thank you so much. And yes, I've been to Empty Cloud, and I do plan. I have reached out about residency, so this is all really
Okay. Yeah,
affirming.
that's the correct step. Good. Way to go. That's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have to wrap stuff up. Let's have the blessing braid so we can read the names of those who are having a difficult time and hold them in our hearts.
Okay, we have Kathy Hopkins, recently passed from cancer. Please share merit and send metta to her daughter, August, as she navigates the loss. Ann Clow, recently passed, share merit and spread metta to her family. Gabe, struggling with addiction and isolation, please spread metta. Wayne Leroy Atwood, born 128/29. I'm not sure what happened there. Passed away recently. Please spread loving kindness for safe passage, a beautiful being. Alan Paris, going through surgery, please spread metta. Mikey, having surgery, please give care. Julianne Shaw passed away today from ovarian cancer. Paul Barnett, colon cancer, please pray for healing.
Do we have other names of people we can bring to mind? Brooks is in the hospital. Bonnie, Juanita's mother-in-law, and Jeff's mother on her final stage of life. John and Jill. Sequoia. Okay. People can turn to page 83 in the chanting book. The verse is on the Buddha's first exclamation, and we'll go immediately after to page 84 on the Buddha's last words. 83. We're getting to practice some Pali. And just hold those people in your hearts. Andamayam patama buddha basita gatayo banamase. Aneka jati sangsarang sandavi sangani bisang. Gaha karanga santo dukkha jati puna punang. For many lifetimes in the round of birth, wandering on endlessly, for the builder of this house I searched. How painful is repeated birth. Gaha karakaditosi punagehang nakahasi. Sabate pasuka bagagaha kutang wisankatang. Wisankata gata chitang tanhanang kaya hachaga. House builder, you've been seen. Another home you will not build. All your rafters have been snapped. Dismantled is your ridgepole. The non-constructing mind has come to craving's end. Page 84. Handamayam pachima owadagatayo banamase. Handadani bhikkhu hamantayami wo. Now, bhikkhus, I declare to you, why Dhamma Sankara changes the nature of conditioned things. Apamadena sampadeta. Perfect yourselves, not being negligent. Ayang tathagata sapachima vacha. These are the Tathagata's final words. So, is anyone brave enough who's been here 3 times or less? Feel free to, if you want, raise your hand and just introduce yourself and how you heard about us. No pressure though, actually. So, yes. Megan, Betsy, great. Welcome. Yes. Leanne, welcome. We have the heating system. Okay. Okay, great. So as many of you know, monastics in my tradition don't touch money. This is all really freely offered. The books in the back are free. Please take some. They're great books. A bunch of people brought food, and please feel free to get some and just talk to one another and get to know the people here. It's a great bunch of practitioners. And yeah, just encourage, if it feels a bit intimidating, so many people, just find a few people who you'd really like to dive into a conversation with, and feel free to focus on that, but it's worth talking. And we'll hope to see you all next Saturday. Let's wave goodbye to our Zoom friends. Okay. And